Hi everyone, today on the Batcave, I've got my friend Alex West and co-host of the Faculty of Horror, so stay tuned. Coming up.
Hi guys, welcome back to the Batcave, and as promised, this is our 1,000 subscriber episode to celebrate 1,000 subscribers, and as promised, I have a very special co-host. This is Alexandra West. If you're familiar with the Faculty of Horror podcast, and I hope you are, if you're enjoying the Batcave, you will love my podcast. Alex is my co-host and also my dear friend, and we've been doing the podcast for coming up on
4 years.
4 years, and we've never really done a proper Q&A episode. We do answer questions that come into us from our social media. We answer them through social media, through emails and stuff. We do an assessment episode once a year, but for this, we thought it would be fun for you guys to see us answer your questions. So that's what we're doing today. So Alex.
So
what's
Andrea.
new?
Not much. Thank you so much for having me on the Batcave. I'm not quite a YouTube virgin, but I'm still nervous.
Don't be nervous. We're all friends here. Speaking of friends, we have wonderful questions. Thank you so much to all of you who have submitted questions. Let's get started. So to begin, we have a question from Rusty B, who said, "Can you get me Metallica tickets to the show in Toronto?" No, Rusty, I cannot. If there was someone I could kill to get myself in, please point them out to me, because I'll make it happen.
It's not me. Not me.
No, we're not going to kill Alex to see Metallica. Not even
Right?
for Metallica. Aww. The question is, interested to hear your thoughts on Thomas Ligotti and other contemporary horror authors in general. You want to tackle that first?
Yeah, sure. I'm not a huge horror fiction fan in general. I never really fully got into it. I think the main extent of what I loved was the R.L. Stine Fear Street series, and prior to that, Goosebumps. But the one that kind of caught my attention earlier this year was My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix, which Andrea very kindly lent me, and I really enjoyed that. And then I went back and read I believe his first book, Horror Store, which is like a horror narrative that takes place in like an IKEA type store. That was really interesting, really fun, really creepy. And what I liked so much about My Best Friend's Exorcism was that it was creepy, but also really heartfelt. I actually cried at the end of it. And I think I saw you later that night and I was like, Andrea, if anything ever happened to you, I would totally kill someone. I don't know. And she was like, all right.
Yeah, that one was great. I read that one too last year and I really enjoyed it. Thomas Ligotti comes up often in Rue Morgue magazine, and I'm always proofreading the issues and I'm like, oh, I gotta read that. Yeah, I gotta read that. Every so often I review a book for the book section in Rue Morgue, more often than not the nonfiction. So yeah, I'm also cripplingly, horribly, disgracefully behind on my horror fiction. The one I'm reading right now is called House of Leaves, and I hadn't heard of it. Someone gave it to me as a gift earlier this year, so I started reading it and I'm loving it. It's taken me forever because I'm so goddamn busy, but I posted a picture of it on my Instagram and so many people were like, boom, my favorite book. I love that book. I can't wait to hear what you think of that book. So that's what I'm picking my way through, but thank you, Rusty, for identifying a huge blind spot in our horror repertoire. We are not horror fiction literature experts, alas. But hopefully we can answer the next question a bit more completely. Steve Ramsey asks us,
Congratulations! I was happy to discover you, Lady Hellbat, from Bloodbath and Beyond. I recently got obsessed with the Wreck series. Have you gotten into much international horror?
well, Steve, once again, I am a little bit into international horror. I would like to be way more into international horror. I remember when I was a kid, I would watch Japanese and Chinese movies on Channel 14 on Saturday nights on this multicultural channel, and I loved it. Japanese horror is so bizarre and so surreal and out there and creative, and while I can't maybe pick apart its themes as clearly as I can North American stuff, I find it so interesting. I'm always on the lookout for something that's really fucked up and really different, and I find a lot of that in the international stuff.
I actually got into more Asian horror through Andrea on our website, facultyofhorror.com. We did a 31 Days of Horror where we each kind of broke the month in half and recommended a different horror movie for every day. And Andrea put a ton of A-horror or Asian horror on there, and it's stuff beyond kind of the J-horror like Grudge, Ringu, that kind of stuff. So I've been actually kind of working my way through those, and those have been really great. I actually wrote a book on New French Extremity, and so that is what I've been really into. But you mentioned the Rec series, and that was something I did a bit of research on as well. And I think there's a really interesting linkage to, because Rec is Spanish, to the Spanish Civil War and some of the stuff that happened in there in history. But I think that's what I love, and what can be hard about getting into international horror is it is so indebted to its own history from the country it's coming from. So if you're not super familiar with it, I always try to make myself more acquainted with it. So it can take a bit of research on my end to get into it, but I do love it, and I'm always happy when something new comes out.
Yeah, Alex is definitely a lot more well-read at the European horror, British horror. She's the daughter of a prolific Brit filmmaker, so she knows a lot more about that. And I read her book recently, and there's still titles on there that I have yet to see. All right, moving on. Eric Peterson, films that you think deserve a deluxe Blu-ray DVD release or out-of-print film that you'd like to see on Blue DVD streaming so people can see it. I've got two. Number one on that list is probably Why Horror? And not just because I was in it, but because it is so cool. It's a documentary about horror fandom, about why people love horror, why people not only love horror so much that they consume a lot of the media, but they come to conventions and they want to meet the filmmakers. Horror has a community. And so it's a documentary about that. And it was hosted by my friend Tal Zimmerman, a fellow Rue Morgue contributor, and I appeared in it, and it did really well in the festival circuit, but it does not have a DVD Blu-ray release. I think it appeared as a special feature on one of the Rec movies, actually.
Yeah, I remember that.
4 or something?
Yeah, I think it was Rec 4.
International, yeah, anyway. So that is one that I'd really love. People are always asking me, how can I check it out? My parents are dying to see it, but there's nowhere I could send you. And the second one for that would be Pin, A Plastic Nightmare, which is a Canadian made-for-TV film that I have been pushing for us to do on the podcast. I know it's on our list.
Yeah.
I'd really like to tackle it one day. If you can find that, it's a gem.
For me, for out of print or kind of hard to find, I'd have to say Ken Russell's The Devils. Because that's another one we have on our list to do on the podcast, but we don't want to do it unless you guys have really easy access to it. And I know there's some different region DVDs, and you can, find it through non-legal means online.
Yeah.
But I'd love to see that film. Just get, there's different cuts of it. Had this really storied production history. So I'd love, a few of the people are still alive, and not many of them are anymore, to get some of those stories and information. As for a kind of deluxe Blu-ray DVD that I would love to see, I have to say Candyman. Every time I watch that movie, I fall more and more in love with it. And it works as a really entertaining film. It has so many different social issues that kind of weave throughout it. It's also based on a Clive Barker story. I think it's a brilliant film adaptation of a short story. And again, I'd love to just learn more about it and have a really beautiful, pristine print of it kind of kicking around. Yeah. So this one comes from Glenn, and he says, how do you think the political and social climate following the US elections will be reflected in the future horror output, and how will it manifest? What will characterize it? Will it be a global manifestation, or will it be primarily contained to the States and neighboring countries?
I have been asked that a lot since the election.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I did a Q&A interview episode with Trick or Treat Radio with the Deadites, so I'll link that in the description box below, where we talked at length about that. And I don't like to predict, because I want to be surprised. Like, horror is such a living, organic thing, and things bloom out of it in reaction to things that we can only really explain or describe in retrospect. So it's difficult to kind of foresee. I can tell you what I would hope to see, which is to say I would hope to see a lot more outsider culture voices contributing to the stories. I think the presidential election is directly targeting them and inciting a lot of fears around those kind of relations. So that's what I would like to see. Further to that, I have talked to a couple of people about the presidential elections and why I was shocked and why I was surprised by the result. And a lot of people were saying you shouldn't have been, because there was a lot to preempt what happened. There was a lot going on that indicated that something like this would occur. And when I think of films like Battle Royale, which is not a North American film, but The Hunger Games were, and all of a sudden those themes became relevant over here, and God damn it. And that series did really well, which I think is maybe telling.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting time for culture in general. We are part of that, crazy liberal elite. And Lord knows, Andrea and I are probably more progressive and left than even Bernie Sanders. So I think we have high hopes that artists and filmmakers and writers and anyone who creates content will take it upon themselves to be critical and to be concerned about what's going on. And I don't think it will be limited to North America or anything like that. What was it? 5 months ago, we had Brexit, which I think was kind of the first rise of this white nationalist movement. And even now we're seeing Putin in the Eastern Europe getting increasingly more aggressive with his stances and possibly, moving into different countries. So this is going to be a worldwide thing. And we're going to have to be really careful, and we have to say shit. We have to say shit all the time, and we have to know. And when people say, how could you have not expected it? I only want to say, well, Hillary is up so many votes. So it's hard, it's complicated, and I don't think we're going to see what we saw after 9/11, which was the rise in torture porn, things like that. I think a lot of filmmakers and a lot of film fans are quite exhausted by that. I'm really excited for the new film by Jordan Peele of Key and Peele, and I think he made the film through Blumhouse. And it's an American film which has a really racialized background and is going to really attack those kind of racial discrepancies that happen in the United States, and it's systemic racism. So I think that will be a big cresting point, and I think we're going to see a lot more like that.
We hope so.
Fight the fight.
What's next? Aiden Fortner asks us, I'm curious what your and Alex's thoughts are on the rape revenge subgenre. I Spit on Your Grave, Hard Candy, Last House on the Left. It seems most horror fans I know are split into two camps regarding these kinds of films. Love them for the brutal violence and satisfaction. So that's a great question. That's another question that I feel like we're asked a lot, because the rape revenge subgenre, like, how do feminists feel about that? That's kind of a murky thing. And I think one of the things that I personally have come up against a lot being a female horror critic is, well, these things are violent against women, ergo you mustn't like them, ergo how can you speak to the horror they're in, like how can you like slasher movies when they're so misogynist? It's something that we hear a lot.
Why don't you go knit a quilt?
Yeah, just put a doily on it, it's fine. So do you want to take a stab?
Sure. I actually wrote about in my book about New French Extremity, the film Irreversible by Gaspar Noé is a film that centers around a really brutal and graphic rape scene. And for me, I kind of fall into one of two camps when we talk about rape revenge. I don't have a problem with it as, a female, a feminist, a horror scholar, a horror critic, a film writer, because I don't think the directors are making rape hip and cool and like something everyone should go out and do. It's a critical thing. It's a bad thing. They're showing how viscerally it hurts not only women and the victims of it and of sexual violence, but the people around them, and how society kind of can crumble around events like this. On the other hand, as a female viewer and lover of films, I get really tired of narratives that involve women being sexually assaulted, becoming pregnant, or getting married. I just think we have more to do, and we have more things to see and explore. in the realm of female experiences and narratives. So I'm fine with them. I think especially the ones in the 70s were really interesting and of a certain period, and the cultural climate of that time, it has a lot to do with them. But right now in this day and age, I want more from my films.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. It's used as a narrative device, and sometimes it's used really well, as in the original I Spit on Your Grave. I really enjoyed Hard Candy. I really enjoyed Last House on the Left. The remake of I Spit on Your Grave had a completely different tone than the first film. And horror movies can have a whole lot of tones. It can be very, very serious and dour, like Irreversible. That is hard to watch. That is irreversible, not in name only. But I Spit on Your Grave was also very dark. The remake, however, injected a whole lot of camp, and that to me felt problematic and inappropriate. So insofar as Alex was saying, use different ways to engage women into your narratives. There are other things you can do to piss women off other than rape them or fuck with their kids. Like, let's get it out of the vaginal realm. That's something I'd like to see.
If you do a second question? Oh, no, yeah.
That was a follow-up. He wrote, upon seeing other questions posted here, I think I might have gone too deep. What's your favorite horror movie guilty pleasure? And no question is too deep for us. I realize I just said vaginal territory, but...
I love going deep on vaginal territories.
What's your horror guilty pleasure?
Oh, you know. Well, I used to say it was Pet Sematary 2, but now I just love Pets. I think it's a brilliant movie. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's great. I think it does so much right as a horror sequel. But my true guilty pleasure, like the one I feel kind of dirty saying right now, is Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. I don't care if it's the theatrical cut, the producer's cut, whatever it is. That shit is bananas. I love it. I watch it every year. It makes me so happy.
For myself, maybe the film that I find hardest to defend that I love is House of a Thousand Corpses. If you follow the Batcave, you've probably seen my Rob Zombie filmography video, and that is probably my most watched video, my most commented upon, and come at me bro video, because people are really divided on Rob Zombie. And my favorite film from his filmography is Lords of Salem, and my second favorite is A Hard House of a Thousand Corpses. And when it comes down to brass tacks, technically, I find it hard to defend that film. I just fucking love it. I just do.
Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Tim asks, with the podcast, have you and Alex ever experienced any nasty pushback from trolling fanboys in the horror genre? You know, the ones who claim the Ghostbusters remake ruined their childhood?
Oh, we know. We know exactly the kind of horror fan you mean. The podcast is on iTunes, which opens up a forum for people to critique it. And I think when we started the podcast, we used to look very carefully at those reviews and, take them kind of seriously. But it's hard to take seriously a review that's like, oh, it started out good, but then they started in on my white male privilege. No, thank you. Or these girls think they're so funny when in reality they're not. Like, these aren't very constructive feedback, and so we kind of laugh at them and shrug them off.
We certainly find them funny.
Somebody posted about that same Rob Zombie video, actually, that I did not understand exploitation films, and the reason I wasn't appreciating his movies was because I need to read more. And he posted that in the video, and he also came to my Facebook page to send me personal messages saying, like, I know, you just need to read more. Now that, we can agree to disagree, man.
Yes.
But in direct contrast to what I said earlier about not reading enough horror fiction, I read a lot about horror movies, and I don't know, I'd like to think that I know enough to contribute something to the conversation. So that is definitely the kind of feedback that gets my back up, and I don't get it much.
Oh, I'm so angry right now.
Yeah, it's bad. If you're watching this is, I never replied to you, so consider this right there.
Yeah.
Gross. Don't like that. Yeah, I think we get a few guys or people who write into us, I'm going to assume they're white males because they seem very offended that we take issues with white males sometimes. But you know what? Don't care. Deal with it. I would say some of our criticism actually does come from other feminists who are worried or concerned or point out that we are not intersectional enough, or certain issues and jokes we've made or things that we've brought up or haven't fully explained. And I have to say those ones hurt way more than some guy being like, you don't understand me in my privilege. And those hurt more because we want to do right by those people. We want to do right by everyone who's engaged and listening. We want this to be a podcast, and Andrea wants this to be a YouTube channel for everyone. And so when we get called out on that stuff, believe me, we hear it, we respond to it, we try to engage it and just apologize and work it out as best we can. And we do really take it on board. And it's hard because I feel like we're in a time right now where everyone, as progressive as you might be, we all have stuff to learn, and we're all learning, and in learning you make mistakes, and all you can do is try harder. That's it.
Great question.
All right.
Random Ross, one of my first subscribers, one of my first friends on YouTube, writes in, what would you rather be? A vampire, werewolf, ghost, zombie, or witch?
Witch.
Well, I'd rather be more of a witch, because I feel like I'm already partway there.
But like, what kind of witch would you be? Because there's a bunch of like.
A good witch or a bad witch?
I want like a non-binary witch.
Oh, that's what we would both be, a non-binary witch.
Because I feel like I'd be like a benevolent witch. Like I'd help people out a lot, but like some of my ex-boyfriends, like, you better run.
Yeah. Like I'd be her dark side.
Yeah.
It would be like Santa and Krampus.
They'd be like, oh no, here come the witches. And we'd be like, hee.
I do.
You do that.
Benjamin Powell, another friend of the Faculty of Horror. Question to my favorite faculty. Aww. If you had to teach a classroom composed entirely of characters from one era of horror films, Universal Classics, 80s, and so on, which would you choose and why? Teach a classroom composed entirely, so they're in the class.
I think
They're
that's
the
how I read it,
students.
yeah.
Okay.
I'd say 90s. I mean, I love that time period in horror. I know that's not a totally popular opinion, but I like to engage with people who know what they're talking about and who have opinions. And the 90s really did a lot with the postmodern characters who horror films existed in their world. So they were answering back, they were challenging people on it. And so yeah, I'd like a discussion with those characters.
I would like a very hard discussion with some of the directors of the remakes lately, because I am not anti-remake. I'm not. Remakes have a time and a place, and for a couple of film critics who like to dive into these films and problematize some of them, a remake is a perfect opportunity to bring them up to speed, but they're not. So if I could get all of you guys together in a classroom, I might lock the door and burn it down, but that's who I would choose. Jay has a question for us. My question for you is, like many of us in the horror scene, we got introduced to horror at a very young age, whether it be an older sibling, family member, or randomly stumbling across a horror movie on TV. Now we live in an age where parents actually care about the rating systems, and the leniency of kids seeing R-rated movies is no longer the norm. What are your thoughts on that? Should kids be introduced to darker subject matter at a young age? And do you think it affects the horror community of tomorrow? Great question. What you got?
I think, and this was something that my parents did with me, is that you should introduce your kids, if you have them, to kind of everything and see what they grapple onto. I mean, we kind of grew up in the era of like the 80s through the 90s, and there was like a lot of weird shit out there for kids. Like there's Beetlejuice, Addams Family, Ghostbusters, and I just kept gravitating towards those movies. That was it. And then eventually I was like, holy shit, there's like a whole subgenre, and oh my God, there's a whole basement in my video store dedicated to it. And so that was just me going to find them, but I also loved comedies and dramas and everything. So I think everyone should kind of be exposed to it, I think, at the right level. And there's some very close friends of mine who just can't do horror. They can't do it. It freaks them out. It's too much for them. And that's okay. That's fine. You know, different strokes for different folks. But yeah, I think everyone should kind of be given a safe space to try it.
At my age and my stage in life, I'm starting to have friends who have kids, and their kids are approaching the age where they are starting to wonder, like, I am obsessed with horror movies. I write for Rue Morgue magazine. I work at Rue Morgue magazine. What do I do, you know? And the parents that I really admire are the ones who do, just like Alex said, was, you know, just kind of give a little bit of exposure and see what happens with it. I can think of an example. I was just talking to somebody at the Rue Morgue Writers Party last weekend where one of his boys, they went to see a movie and he got scared and was like, we have to go. I am afraid and I want to leave this environment. And his other son, as he got older, watched something scary and reacted, was scared and afraid, but wanted to keep going. And those are perfect visual cues for how to read your kids and what should happen. I think the only thing that would be problematic was if your child was showing a proclivity for reading horror fiction, for example, reading horror comic books, and if you ban it, if you say no and take that away, oh man, you are setting yourself up for a really interesting adolescent rebellion where as soon as they're out of the house, they're going to do everything they can behind your back, and then they don't have you to come to if anything happens. Like it's just kind of a chasm of trust, in my opinion. Again, I don't have kids. I'm not an expert on parenting. I can't say, but my folks were just happy I was reading and thinking and learning. So whatever the content is, I think that's got to be the bottom line. So our next question is from Amanda. Congratulations, Lady Halbat. Thank you, Amanda. What is the scariest true situation story you've got? Also, when a movie is based on a true story, doesn't it make it scarier? You got a real situation?
Not really. I tend to freak myself out more than anything else, but I've never had anything like supernatural or super creepy happen.
Well, just last weekend, we had a party at Rue Morgue, and the back area of Rue Morgue, there's a lounge where we've got all these statues and posters, and it's very gothic and dramatic place. And I was walking in to do some decorating, and I kept seeing something move in the corner, and I got so spooked, I couldn't go back there, and I made the mistake of telling Alex, I was like, there was like a white fog in the corner when I walked in, and it just whooshed out, and I won't go back out there. And she was like, why did you tell me this? It turns out I went back in and I saw it again, and I was like, oh, it's a reflection off that poster.
You didn't tell me that.
I didn't?
No.
Oh, I told somebody else at the party.
Can you believe this shit?
Yeah. It was just the glare off a poster. But you had a good time. You were okay.
I think so.
The most recent time that I was actually really scared was I was working a tattoo convention, and we were in Baltimore. And I was working a booth for a company called Icon. And so the tattoo convention's going on. We're selling really expensive equipment, really expensive tattoo machines. And my partner, who I was working the booth with, wasn't feeling well. So she went back to the hotel, and she's like, okay, at the end of the day, just take all the money and gather up all the really expensive pieces and take them back to the hotel, which I did. And I was like, oh, I've got all this responsibility. I'm in charge. This is great. And it wasn't until I got outside that I realized that I was in downtown Baltimore with several $1,000s of cash, even more money's worth of tattoo equipment, and everybody who was at that convention knew that I was working the Icon booth, and I was fucking terrified. I felt so vulnerable, and it really struck me how these situations present themselves where it never even really occurred to me that I would have to worry about walking down the street. And of course, it was totally fine, but I think that was the last time that I was scared shitless.
You were probably like a block away from being in an episode of The Wire.
I saw John Waters and I was like, hey, Mom. Hi. So the second part of that question, when a movie is based on a true story, I don't find it makes it scarier, and I think that kind of ties in with just my skepticism of media, 'cause even when I hear a news story, that's based on a true story, and that's based probably really loosely on a true story. So
yeah, I find it tends to take me out of it more than anything, because I think one of the biggest examples of something like that is when a horror film purports to be real. So that's anything from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre to the Blair Witch Project, and these films that make a big deal about being based on real events. So obviously the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based off of some element of Ed Gein, but Blair Witch Project was totally made up. So I find it kind of takes me out of it, and I kind of keep going like, is this really real? What's real? What's not? And so I'd rather just dive into something and maybe learn later that it was actually based on something real.
Yeah. And that's not to say that real life stuff doesn't have truly terrifying permutations in movies. Alex and I were just talking a little bit earlier about Jonestown, and Jonestown has been covered in cinema numerous different ways by horror auteurs such as Ty West. However, I was saying that I thought Ty West's version in The Sacrament was way less scary than a really cheesy dramatized version that I found on Netflix. I think it was just called Jonestown, but it scared the crap out of me way more than a polished horror director's offering on the same topic. So they're out there. Want to do the next one?
Sure. This is from Wushu Jimmy Brown. Congratulations. This is probably a softball question. They never are. But let's say you're putting together a syllabus for a college 101 class on horror films. What are your first 3 to 5 movies in the syllabus and why? Do you go with something older to set up the history of the genre, something that encapsulates much more of the conventions of the genre, or even something that would challenge many people's conceptions of what a horror movie is?
That's a great question. I'm eager to hear what you would say about that, because if you follow the podcast, you know that Alex is very much my foil in terms of the technical aspects of horror movies, and I am blissfully ignorant of a lot of, like, I try to learn as I go. It's just like, this is a mise en scène, this is what these things mean, but for the most part, it's a mystery to me. So I never even took a film studies 101 class. Like, I took sociology, which kind of takes the bigger picture, and I choose to apply them to horror movies as texts. So if I were teaching the class and I were making it like my own personal, here's what makes me tick, here's the input that made Lady Hellbat what she is, it would definitely strongly start with Night of the Living Dead, because I just feel like that is such a perfectly beautiful reflection of what was going on at the time, and it was by a filmmaker who wasn't trying to do that. George Romero is famous for saying that he cast Dwayne Johnson in the role just because he did the best audition, and the fact that he was Black wasn't really a consideration, and yet in the resulting text that makes it a hugely revolutionary film, rife for social commentary. So that would definitely be on my list.
What else? You got 3 to 5. Come on.
Oh boy. Okay, 3 to
Pick
5.
one.
Going on with that, I'd probably do the Dawn of the Dead remake. I think that's a great example of how a remake can take what the original film did and adapt it to fit a newfangled social situation. I think the original Dawn of the Dead was superior, but the remake is relevant in that way, and it's a great example of that. And another one of those, oh schnucks, I guess I would pick, I'm trying to pick movies
You have
that
to do one more. Come on, one more.
that
An eager group of kids
that
sitting
Alex
in front
likes,
of you.
that she would accept. I thought It Follows was a really big deal, and The Babadook. You wouldn't be taking my class, though, right?
No, I probably would. This is when I'd start rating you poorly on Rate
That's
My
it. I'm
Professor.
sticking to 2. What are yours?
I want my money back from your damn class. I'd kind of do a chronological thing, because when I took my few film studies classes, it was really beneficial to work through everything chronologically. So I'd probably start with something like James Whale, Bride of Frankenstein. Actually, one of the few horror films I watched in my Intro to Film Studies class was the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers from the 1950s. And it's this really fun, silly movie, but we all watched it as a class, and then we stayed later for the lecture on it, and our professor unpacked so much stuff from it in a really entertaining way. So I have really fond memories of that. So I definitely keep that in there. As for the kind of 60s New Hollywood era, I would definitely agree with Andrea on Night of the Living Dead. I think that is so important. You can't really skip that one, and it's a great watch. It informs so much of what we know. Then I would move on to something like Carrie, the original by Brian De Palma. I think that factors in a lot of the kind of also new Hollywood elements that you talk about in Night of the Living Dead, but it has a lot of second wave feminism elements in there, great performances, great camera techniques. And then to throw something in after that, more contemporary, I definitely, I would do The Blair Witch Project because it's so monumental, it's so singular, and it remains so singular. And I really love that movie. I love going back to it. And I think that's now something because Andrea and I are in our 30s, and kids, in their teens, maybe even early 20s, aren't super aware of that movie and what it meant. And I think even in this kind of cornucopia of found footage horror that we have now, it still remains so singular because it's slow and it's creepy and it's eerie and it's about bickering and it's about getting lost and it's about America. So that's one I'd love to share with the class.
So Alex would teach the class and I would just come in and be like, Night of the Living Dead, and I'm out.
No, you could be my TA.
Thank you, good night. Oh.
Hey, TAs are well paid.
They are.
I've never made that much money in my life. Since. All right, where are we? Caleb asks us, what are some standout best death scenes in horror in your opinion? Also, are there any underrated horror soundtracks that really stand out to you?
I think for favorite horror deaths or kind of standout ones for me, it is in Jason X. So that's when Jason goes to space. And it's when, I think it's the chick, he like freezes the chick's head and he smashes it and she like falls apart. And it's kind of a rip on a death that Sub-Zero does in Mortal Kombat. But Jason does it. It's fun. It's one of the few kind of really fun, crazy things about Jason X that I still really like and still find very singular. But I find Jason is really good for like good deaths. I like the one where he beats the kid in the sleeping bag against the tree, burns them. Yeah, it's good.
For me, I think the death scene that affected me most contemporarily was in Bone Tomahawk. And I don't want to go too deep into it. If you haven't seen it, I would strongly, strongly recommend it. This was a film that I remember when it came to the attention of Rue Morgue, we were like, is it a horror movie though? It definitely has a lot of horror movie elements, especially in its overarching themes. I think maybe Faculty of Horror will take a look at it one day. Yeah. But there is a death scene in that film that, apart from being very visually gruesome, which it is, it's very visually gruesome, but it has tremendous gravity toward the story. And you see the death scene, and then you see the people witness it, and the cast is excellent, and you just see the hope drip from their faces. And I will never forget how I felt when that scene, like just the bottom of my stomach dropped out, and I was never the same. So that one is my favorite. What was the second part of the question?
That is the underrated horror soundtrack.
Underrated horror soundtracks.
I would say for me, I'm going to go back to one of the films I mentioned earlier and say Brian De Palma's Carrie. I really love the kind of melodic elements that soundtrack encompasses, as well as the more tense moments where it really apes on the Psycho soundtrack with the re. So it provides a lot of tension as well as being very lackadaisical. It's indebted to its Italian composer, and you saw a lot of that in the 70s, and I really like those a lot.
I don't know about underrated. I'm not a huge horror soundtrack nut, and I say that because I know some serious horror soundtrack nuts. Like Waxworks is putting out everything on vinyl, and collectors are just eating it up. And if you heard this, and I'm like, when I watch a movie, I'm not always paying tremendous attention to the soundtrack. A couple of examples where I did take notice of the soundtrack were Maniac. The Maniac remake with Elijah Wood had an excellent soundtrack. I really enjoyed the Neon Demon that came out earlier this year, had a great soundtrack. But for my favorite and underrated, I think it goes back to our Faculty of Horror episode on Fright Night, where I have to comb YouTube for clips to use. Like I pull a lot of clips out of the movie itself, but I also watch the trailer, and I tend to just, you know how on YouTube you just fall down a rabbit hole of like suggested videos, and then this one auto plays after that. I love the Fright Night soundtrack. There is some 80s dance gold, there's sinister orchestral stuff, and then there's just really upbeat, ugly sweater wearing 80s dance party jams that I love.
All right. Congratulations on 1,000. My question also comes with a bit of a statement as well. And this is from Justin Peterson. I feel that the mainstream horror genre has had a serious problem for some time with a lack of creativity and originality. Do you agree? And what do you think could be done to fix it? Do you think they need to take more chances or just spend more time on development?
Cool. I think we should actually piggyback that with another question that we got from somebody going by the name of Village Native. And they wrote something that was kind of similar. What is modern horror most missing that the Carpenter, Romero, Savini, Craven, Hooper, Golden Age, slasher era had? Everything is either a remake of a remake now or a sequel to The Conjuring. Why aren't directors coming up with concepts that really challenge the genre? Where do you see the genre going from here in both the near and the far future? So to answer that, I think horror fans need to acknowledge the fact that the golden era of horror is the era that you came into horror. It's the era that horror captured you and captured your heart, and you hold those films and those filmmakers sacrosanct. And I say that as somebody who is a huge horror fan, but slashers don't really do it for me. I don't really hold Savini on the same level as I hold Carpenter and Romero. You know, they all have their own things to offer, but in terms of having something to say about the world through their horror movies, they're all very different. So I don't even know if I'd call that the golden age of horror.
Yeah, I think there is a lot to understand, and one of the reasons that we do the Faculty of Horror the way we do is because films are subjective, and the enjoyment of films is subjective. And Andrea and I have watched films and had completely different opinions on them, and neither one of us is wrong. So we really come into our work from that vantage point. And I agree with Andrea. I think the age of nostalgia is big and it's strong. And, you know, looking back now, 30, 40 years, we can say, yep, those are the films that are classics. But 30, 40 years from now, we aren't in the place to say currently these are what the classics are. And I think the film industry has changed a lot since New Hollywood. Actually, if you'd like to hear some really interesting insights on the New Hollywood studio system, I would highly recommend the Brian De Palma documentary just titled De Palma. And it's just an interview with him, and he talks about his kind of ascendance through the studio system after multiple failures, and he just kept getting a lot of chances. So it's such a different time, and films are being made so differently, and the studio system is so different. But for me, I feel like I see several films every year where I feel like, wow, they're really taking a chance. They're really doing something. They're really saying something. So for me, like this past year, that's everything from 10 Cloverfield Lane to something like the Iranian film Under the Shadow. And even a few years ago, there's this film that I fell in love with called Unfriended. And it's this kind of like teen slasher ghost story that's told through like a Skype cam. And it just felt really raw and really present, and it really spoke to a lot of the stuff that we have a lot of fears about now. So I think to say we're not understanding something right now is maybe not the approach to take with understanding modern horror. I think you have to treat it that it's always in flux and it's always evolving because our fears are always changing.
That's right. And there is plenty of creativity out there. There is so much horror out there. Like working at Rue Morgue, there is more than we could ever hope to review or cover. And that's just the fact of the matter is, you know, like the big studio movies have huge marketing budgets that they ram down our throats, and so they get talked about. But I think if you're looking for creativity, you want to look at the film festival circuit, you want to look at those reviews, and if you really want to get into circulating creative horror movies, get into horror journalism, seek out those things, put your voice out on the internet, because that is how we hear about the next Lights Out. That's how it works. So yeah,
It's on you, buddy.
it's all on you. Poor Justin. So, a next question is from Evangelia Heretica. What resources or books do you recommend based on the academic side of horror, but are not too heavy-handed? I would love to read more of what I know to be an intelligent genre.
One of the first books that came to mind for me when I saw that question was a book by a man named John Kenneth Muir, and it's called Horror Films FAQ. and it's, I believe, published by Applause Books, and it's just a complete breakdown of the horror genre in a really accessible but super interesting way. It's one of my favorite reference books that I have, and I really enjoy going back to it. I use it a lot just to kind of get a basis or a grounding in a history of something. I highly, highly recommend that book. He's a fantastic writer. He's written several other books about different eras in horror. I think he has a book on horror films of the 70s and of the 80s and of the 90s. They're these huge textbooks. And he also has a terrific blog, and Andrea can link to that in the show notes because that's really accessible. It's really interesting. And then on top of that, I would recommend one of the first books I read when I was kind of getting into horror criticism without really understanding what I was getting into, which is Carol Clover's Men, Women, and Chainsaws. Now, I didn't understand all of it when I first read it. I still don't understand parts of it because she really delves into some elements of Freudian theory. But she breaks down a lot of different tropes and elements, especially in slasher films. Everything from Halloween to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. So it's one of the real cornerstones of horror criticism. So highly recommend checking that one out as well.
Yeah, I come back to that Clover book again and again, and I get something new out of it every time. One more volume that I would throw in that mix, one that was really helpful when I was writing my thesis, was called Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue by Joseph Madry. I believe it was developed into a documentary. I don't remember if I saw it. I don't recall. But I remember the book being great about, because it was very contemporary and it was in the North American context. We're Canadian and it was about American horror, but it was still very accessible and very modern and very interdisciplinary. I take a very sociological approach, so I really like a holistic view like that. And also anything by Calum Vatnsdal. He's a Winnipeg-based writer and also a director. He's made a couple of films, but he wrote a great one on Canadian horror called It Came From Within. And yeah, there's a lot of it out there. And maybe what I'd like to just tack on to the end of that is academic texts in horror is just like you and me. It's just somebody who's read a bunch of stuff and has come up with their opinions, and they give it, but there is no right and wrong. There is no final word on horror. Everybody's just doing the best they can and talking about what moves them. Next, Rob G asks us, what sort of antagonists and or protagonists would you like to see of more in horror? Great question. It's hard to assign I'd like more protagonists like this. I would like more protagonists like everything. I would like to watch a movie and be like, I don't know who's going to die. It is not clear to me who the final girl is going to be. It's not clear to me that the black token character is going to go first, or the stoner is going to go off and smoke a joint and be off first. I love when movies transcend those expectations. That is what floats my boat, and I see it happening. It's exciting.
Yeah, I'd like to see actually more blurring of antagonist and protagonist.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see it done with more likability. I think there's a tendency in horror to make a lot of characters really unlikable right off the bat.
Yeah.
And I'd like characters to be treated with more respect because, you know, there's groups of friends and everyone has issues with different people, but inherently we all kind of like each other. That's the point of these communal relationships that we have. So I'd like to see more blurring of lines. I'd like to see a little bit more subtlety, pull back on a couple of those big traits that we're all so used to, and have a bit more fun with it. This one is from Steve Sick. Are shorts from YouTube and Vimeo going to continue to outshine most theatrical horror films?
Probably. I don't know. I can't speak to that because shorts from YouTube and Vimeo, when it comes to shorts, again, Rue Morgue is so inundated with the latest feature. I'm not up to speed on my shorts. That said, I've worked on a short horror film and I am working on another short horror film with a director friend of mine, and I think we're doing great things, and I think we're paving the way toward a feature film and shorts that are independently made and produced and being distributed for free on YouTube and Vimeo. It's a great time to be alive and to be a horror fan and to be a horror filmmaker, because outlets like that do give you an opportunity to see what's up and coming. And so I continue to outshine. I I hope, Steve, that you share some of those links because I'd like to see some of those. I mean, the example I can think of is Lights Out, of course, which was Sandberg's influential short that just exploded so big that it turned into a feature. I was thoroughly satisfied with the feature, and now he's going to have a great career in Hollywood. So,
And Mama also started as a short as well, the one that eventually got made, I think by the same people who made the short. I think shorts are an interesting element. They get played a lot at film festivals, both horror and otherwise. You see them a lot of times there, but I feel like essentially they're more utilized as a kind of director's calling card. And for me, I love a good short film, but I get the sense that sometimes when I'm watching a short film, I'm watching a director's demo reel. Like, here's all the shit I can do, boom, 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 rather than telling a really cohesive story in a really short span of time. It's like writing a book versus writing just copy. You have to be adept at both, I think, if you really want to consider yourself good at being a writer, director, or whatever you want to be. And so I don't know if they're outshining them per se. I think there's something that's kind of niche and in the film industry, and I think to outshine them, they have to become more important to a general populace. So I think they're a great way for directors to get their foot in the door. But I think we as consumers and people that create content and are in the industry need to figure out ways to better utilize them. And I think we're getting there because I know some of the streaming services that are out there right now are starting to include short films because they're great, they're made, and because of the ways that making films are getting cheaper and cheaper to produce, more people are able to make them. So I'm hopeful that we'll get to see more of them, not just on Vimeo or YouTube, but in a more kind of official status. Yeah.
All right. So our final question, and I'll take the opportunity to once again thank you. These are excellent questions. I was like, we might get so many that we have to pick and choose which ones we want to answer. We didn't, because they're all excellent. So thank you so much. This one comes from Megan. My question is, will you guys ever consider recording a video version of the podcast, or do you think you'll just stick to audio?
Fuck no.
Fuck no video? Fuck no audio?
Fuck no video. No audio, no video, no more. It's done.
We're canceling it now. Thanks a lot, Megan.
We're kidding. No, I'm really reticent to be on film. I used a lot of concealer today, guys. I'm not gonna lie, and I'm very thankful for all the lights that the Batcave has right now. It's not really my jam. I love podcasts as a medium. I love that it kind of takes this barrier away from us because I'm so aware of, as a woman in media and industry, of the way I look, the way I'm judged on the way I look in life and everything else. So it's nice to get to sit with one of my best friends in a dark room and talk about horror movies, once a month. So that's something I hold really sacred, and I love sharing it with you guys. But I don't think this is going to happen a lot.
It's different. It's really different. And when I say that, when we record our podcast, we are sitting in a room, we are sitting across from each other, not like now. Now we're sitting next to each other and we're talking to each other, but we're talking to the camera. And we've got our producer behind the camera who we're also talking to because he needs to signal us if something's fucked up or if we have something in our teeth. Like, he's part of the conversation, and that affects the conversation. It doesn't make it bad per se, but when we get into the podcast room and we close the door to the vault, we are talking to each other, and it's an intimacy and it's a back and forth. So that is one element of it. Another element is that we're talking some pretty highfalutin concepts, so I, for one, appreciate the opportunity to be able to edit as tightly as we do and to drop clips in. That's something that's a lot more difficult to do with YouTube, what with copyright laws and stuff like that. So I'm thrilled to have Alex in the episode and to continue with the Batcave, but the Faculty of Horror is going to stay an audio podcast because that's just what it is.
Yeah, I got a radio play kind of face, so.
Well, that's it for our questions, guys. Thank you once again for wonderful questions, but we have one more surprise up our sleeve. Tell them, Alex.
So, for the first and only giveaway I will ever do of this book, pending current date and time, we're going to give away one copy of my book, Films of the New French Extremity, Visceral Horror and National Identity, with a foreword by one Miss Andrea Subissati. You get the whole thing. We're not going to rip out anything, and we're even going to sign it. So to enter and to perhaps win, all you have to do is comment down below with what your favorite New French Extremity film is and why. You don't have to go too long, sentence or two, boom. And because film is subjective in all the ways we've just talked about, winners will be picked at random. We're just really curious and we love this topic, and Andrea wrote a great foreword. So we just want to see what other people think. And yeah.
So we'll leave that open until December 15th, whereupon a winner will be selected and notified, and we will get that out to you hopefully before Christmas, but maybe not, but hopefully. So enter away. Please share this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe, because the Batcave has a lot more amazing things to come, and we'll see you next time. Bye.